Okay, Messiah. I want to talk about what the Messiah is. This is a really important theme for all of you to understand, especially when it comes to understanding the Bible. In the Old Testament, there was what's called a Messianic hope. And the Messianic hope was there was going to be a Messiah. Messiah means anointed one. In the Old Testament, it was called the Mashiach. That was the Hebrew word for Messiah. In the New Testament, we get Christos, and that means Christ in Greek. But Jesus's last name is not Christ. Christ is his title. That means Messiah. The Messianic hope from the Old Testament that continued on and was fulfilled in the New Testament was starting with Abraham. God had promised that there would be a person that would come from Abraham. Abraham was supposed to be a blessing to all nations. And that promise would be fulfilled in this Messiah figure, that whoever the Messiah is would be a blessing to all nations and would come from Israel, would come from Abraham. Furthermore, there was supposed to be a king that would establish a reign forever, peace, blessings for all nations, and that would be the king. So really, the Messiah was an anointed one, a chosen one by God, who was to establish peace in Israel, to be a king in Israel, and to be a blessing for all nations. Now Matthew's writing this gospel to prove to everybody who reads his gospel, that Jesus is in fact that Messiah. So Jews today who reject Jesus are missing out on the promise of the Messiah, missing out on the fulfillment of the Messiah, the one who's supposed to be a blessing to all nations. They miss out on this. In fact, most Jews are still awaiting a Messiah figure. They're still hoping that the Messiah comes and establishes a political reign. So in the Gospel of Matthew, you will see sometimes Jesus telling people, don't tell people who I am. Don't tell people that I am the Messiah. Don't tell people that I healed you. He'll say that like earlier in the Gospel of Matthew. That's what's called the Messianic secret, the secret revealing of Jesus as being Messiah. He didn't want people to know at that time. Why? Because it wasn't his time to be known publicly as the Messiah. Eventually, the word got out that the Messiah is healing people, that the Messiah is here. But Jesus wasn't ready for that time to occur because people wanted and expected Jesus to be a political figure. They wanted him to be a person who overthrew Rome, established a kingdom, and overthrew the entire Roman government, and liberated Jewish people in Israel forever and made them free, no longer under Roman rule. But that's not what Jesus came to do. The Jews missed it. Jesus came as the Messiah to serve, to point us to God, to conquer our biggest enemy, sin. But in his second coming, which is alluded to in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus will come and establish peace physically on this earth. He will establish his reign forever physically. His kingdom will be here physically. It's here spiritually. He comes and talks about the kingdom, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But it's not here completely yet because heaven and earth are not present here together. But this happens when Jesus comes again. It means anointed one, Mashiach is the Hebrew, Christos is the Greek. Throughout the Old Testament, there is a Messianic hope that God would fulfill his promises to Abraham through a king from the line of David that would bring God's blessing to the nations of the world and establish peace and rule as Israel's king. Matthew chapter 1 and 2 are really important to Matthew's idea of what he's trying to communicate, that Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is the king. There's a long list of names in Matthew's gospel. Now, if you can, let's go ahead and go to Matthew chapter 1. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and go to Matthew chapter 1 with me. And we'll talk about a little bit about the genealogy of Matthew so that we can have a better understanding about who Jesus is and what Matthew's trying to do. Can someone read just the first verse?
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Great. So Matthew right off the bat tells us what he's trying to do, communicate that Jesus is the son of David, son of Abraham. Remember, the Messianic hope was that that the Messiah would be a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, which is to be a blessing to all nations, and a son of David. David was Israel's greatest king. And so Matthew's saying that Jesus fulfills the kingly line of David. He is the rightful king. He is the blessing to all nations from Abraham. And then it says genealogy.